When we write a function, we add code inside the body of the function within braces, right? Have you tried accessing that code from outside the function? Let's give it a go.
Okay, let's tackle our last topic for this course. We'll add a new comment and we'll say scope. If I can type. There we go. Let's write a simple function that doesn't really do anything, but will serve to illustrate this concept of scope. We'll call this function array modifier. It has a single parameter named array, and we'll give it the type array of int. Inside the body of the function, let's create a variable. Let's name this array of ints. Very creative, I know. And to this, we'll assign the array that we pass in as an argument. Okay? Next, let's append an integer to this array of integers. So we'll say array of ints dot append. You should remember how to append things from our previous lessons. So dot append. By the way, now you know that append is a function, right? It takes an element, which we'll pass in as an argument. And now this array has 5 added to it. Finally, for the last bit of code, in the body of the loop, let's assign array of ints to a new variable named second array. So we'll say var second array equal array of ints. And that's it for the body of the function. Like I said, it doesn't do much. So here we have a function that takes an array as an argument, assigns it to a new variable that we create within the function, modifies that array, and then assigns it again to yet a new variable. Now, outside the body of the function, let's create another new array that we will use with our function. So I'm going to name this array array of ints as well. So var array of ints. Now, if you're asking, why can't I give it a different name to avoid confusion? Well, that's intentional. So to this, we'll add a few values. We'll say 1, 2, 3, and 4. And now let's call the function array modifier and pass in this array of ints as an argument to the function. So based on what you know so far, let's see if we can figure out what's going on. We declare an array of ints, and then we pass it into our function. Inside the function, we've assigned this array to another variable named array of ints, and then we modify it. Now, it's hard for me to make you anticipate my answers to questions because a playground just ruins it all for me by displaying the results already. As you can see here, the value of array of ints outside the function is 1, 2, 3, 4, but array of ints inside the function is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which is different. So inside the function, we're taking the array passed in as an argument, modifying it to add 5, and then, obviously, we have the result. So what if we look at array of ints after the function call? Well, you can see that it hasn't changed. So even though we're appending 5, it still says 1, 2, 3, 4. So the first thing you should know is that when you pass something into a function via a parameter, as we're doing here, you don't pass in this exact same value. Instead, Swift makes a copy of that by default and assigns it to a new constant. So this constant array doesn't contain this array exactly. It just makes a clone of that. So we have another array that's 1, 2, 3, 4 inside and assigns it to array. Now, inside the body of the function, we can't change the array passed in, well, because this array, the argument, is a constant. So for our next step, we created a new variable, array of ints, with the same name as the one outside of it, and assigned an array containing those same values yet again. Now, here we successfully modify the array because it's a variable, but it doesn't affect the one outside. And we know now that's why, because we're using a copy of the values in the outside array, not that array itself. We'll talk more about when and why this happens in a future lesson. Finally, we assign the modified array to a new constant, second array. So let's check what the final value of second array is after we make the function call outside of the function. So if you hit enter and start typing second, you'll see that there's no second array and Xcode autocomplete doesn't show it. What gives? Well, the reason for this is that second array doesn't actually exist outside of the function. This is because anything created within a function, that is, anything created within these curly braces, exists only inside the function. And this is what is generally referred to as scope. A variable's scope defines where it exists. And in this case, a variable created within the body of the function only exists inside. Now, there are some exceptions to these rules, but again, topic for the future. Now, this concept of scope is also why we're able to create two variables of the same name, one inside the function, array of ints, and another outside the function. If you try to do this, for example, if we did var test equal 1 and then did var test equal 2, you should get an error because we can't create two things with the same name in the same scope. You'll get an error. Within the same scope, names have to be unique. But in different scopes, you can have things with the same name. And so over here, inside the scope of the function, what is created inside the function exists inside that function only, and so we can get away with naming with the same name. Now, we've been talking about variables and constants for a while, but we haven't differentiated between those created inside a function versus outside. Any variable or constant that is created inside a function and assigned a value is called a local variable. So all of these are local variables. Outside of the function, we call them global variables because they're available globally. This means that if we declare an array, for example, if we go up to the top and we declare an array, we'll say let test array equal 1 and assign it to a constant like so outside the function, we can actually use it inside the function as well because this constant is available globally. We're not defining it within a set of braces, so it's available in the global scope. Now, in general, though, because a function is a block of code that we want to treat as a standalone unit, it's preferable that we avoid the use of global variables and constants as much as we can. If we need any values from outside of the global scope inside of the function to help facilitate any logic, then it's better to pass those values in as arguments to the function. This way, we know exactly where the data is coming from. So just keep that in mind. Local variables treated inside the body of a function exist only inside that function. Global variables, on the other hand, are available everywhere. Now, we've talked about enough, so it's time to wrap up this course. But I want to introduce you to one minor topic that we'll talk about more in the future. So I mentioned earlier that append was a function as well. But you'll notice that append does not have any arguments, or it doesn't have any argument labels. Whereas every function that we've written, well, we had an argument label. Now, you can actually create an argument that does not have a label yourself. I'll give you a quick preview. So I'll say function sum function. And then let's say we have some argument. We'll call it test, just for the sake of this. And we'll say int for the type. Now, when we call sum function, you'll notice that it has an argument label named test. To not have an argument label outside, we do the same thing as we did earlier in that we give it an external name and a local name. But for the external name, we simply specify an underscore. And by doing that, we're telling Swift, hey, we want this to have no external name, but we do want it to have a local name of test. So now if you call sum function, you'll see that it does not have an argument label for this argument. I can simply pass in a value. And that is how the append function makes things work.
And that brings us to the end of this course. Functions are where a lot of the power in programming comes from. And as we learn more, we'll be able to build together lots of useful functions to carry out interesting little tasks. Before you take off, let's get some practice in with a quiz and a code challenge. After that, the next course awaits.